Record Store Nation. Welcome back. It is your favorite music podcast. And before we get too far into this is episode 59. Before we get too far into it, I just want to say thank you to Allergic to Taltz. That is our house band that brought us in with the opening music for this episode. Allergic to Taltz. Been following them for many years now. They haven't been around all that long. But they are really rockers from Liverpool. I think they're from Liverpool. You know, they always have to have the subtitles when you hear those guys talking. But Allergic to Taltz, just an epic band from 2024. So really big fan of theirs. So anyway, welcome to the Record Store. You know the concept. You know it. You love it. You can't live without it. Shout out to David Letterman, one of my all-time favorites. You know the concept, though. It is where the ever-expanding wall of CDs... I just grab a CD off of it and rarely throw it back. Every once in a while I'll throw one back because it would be a band that I just did recently, or because, you know, in so many of these cases I have all the albums of these bands. So it could be a band that I've done recently or within the last couple months, or it could be a greatest hits, which I don't actually get too many greatest hits albums, but you know, there always is that scam, that charade, if you will, where they'll put one new song on a greatest hits album, and then the suckers like me that are fans of that band have to buy the greatest hits album. Even though we have all the other songs, we got to have the physical media of the song, the one song that of course became a radio hit too. So it's like you can't win. So anyway, but that is one thing I will throw back, a greatest hits album if I happen to grab one of those. I'll usually do the live albums because I feel like the live albums, there's definitely an added element there. I know I've done a Candlebox live album, and there's just a different element, different sound in some cases, where the live album actually adds something different to the material. So anyway, that being said, welcome to summer. Welcome to the Record Store in July of 2024. Hope you're having an amazing summer. I know we passed the halfway point, so we shall be heading towards Labor Day before you know it, SummerSlam before you know it, and back to school before you know it. And even better, it's Halloween before you know it, and that means the scads of great candy on the shelves at the grocery stores and the 7-Elevens and Target and everywhere, which is fun times for me, so I like that. So anyway, but back to the matter at hand. It is the Record Store episode number 59, and the album rather, is Exiles. It is the 10th studio album by Dan Fogelberg, the late, great Dan Fogelberg, and that is a cliche late, great, but in this case it is. It came out in 1987. Dan Fogelberg, 16 studio albums. He had 3 live albums, many compilation albums, handful of which came out after he died in 2007. Dan Fogelberg, always a favorite of mine. I found his death to be tragic because it just such a great musician, so talented, such a great voice, and responsible for writing so many hits. Hard to categorize. I would say he's rock. He was rock, but he was mellow too. He had a strong affiliation throughout his whole career with Joe Walsh, but I never thought of Dan Fogelberg as a hard rocker. Like you would think of Joe Walsh as being a rocker, whereas you didn't really ever think that way about Dan Fogelberg, even though they were very closely associated throughout their careers. I thought of, if I had to categorize him for the purpose of this episode, I thought Jackson Browne. I even thought James Taylor a little bit to some extent with Dan Fogelberg, but just easy songs to like. And I thought he was so multi-talented in the sense that he flowed so smoothly between rock, not hard rock, but more, I guess, classic rock or just rock in general. He flowed really smoothly between rock and the ballads that he did, that he became so well known for and so famous for, that so many of his top hits were all ballads. So a little background information, Dan Fogelberg was from Illinois, but you know what, honestly, it didn't matter to me. I would have found him and liked him even if I wasn't from Illinois, or if he wasn't from Illinois. It really didn't matter. It's just a unique coincidence that he was from Illinois just as I was. He was born into a musical family. His mother was classically trained at piano. His father was a band director at various high schools and in college, hence the song that he did that became a huge hit called Leader of the Band. So that was obviously a tribute to his dad. So very cool. A little known fact that I found out in the research here is that Dan Fogelberg was in a Beatles cover band at the age of 14. So I thought that was awesome. Could you imagine being in a band at 14? Even as weird as it would have been, and it could have been just a bunch of goofy kids playing around on guitars and drums and stuff, but still, to do a Beatles cover band at 14, I thought was pretty cool. So he kept with it. He started out in small clubs in Champaign-Urbana, which, again, there's a connection there because that is where I went to school at the U of I. He was discovered by Irving Azoff, who became a big-time agent and producer and so on in music. So Azoff was managing REO Speedwagon at the time, also from the very same area. And so he discovered Fogelberg at a local club in Champaign-Urbana. He was signed, and his first album was released in 1972. Soon after that, he was already opening for Van Morrison, so I thought that was pretty cool. He did tour with him, toured with the Eagles. He had met Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh produced his second album, and then again, that started the connection between Joe Walsh and the Eagles and Dan Fogelberg that carried on for many years. A couple of his bigger albums, Twin Sons of Different Mothers, was with Tim Weisberg. And if you remember that album cover, they kind of looked alike. That's kind of one of my shticks, is the people who look alike. But they clicked. Their musical styles clicked. The single that came out of that was The Power of Gold, which was one of my all-time favorite songs of his. Much of that album was instrumental, but that song really made it. That song got a lot of radio airplay and became a huge hit. Fogelberg had a series of big hit albums in the 80s, all throughout the 80s, and he had tons and tons, dozens and dozens of singles that made the charts. So he's one of those guys that you just don't think about. I mean, especially sadly, he's been gone since 2007, but so there hasn't been any new music coming out, but you kind of forget about how many great singles he had and how much radio airplay he had. He was always one of those guys that was kind of under the radar as far as popularity. So May of 2004 was when he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He passed away in 2007, just a couple years later at age 56. His third wife put out, and that comes into play here, why I'm mentioning his third wife, but she put out an album called Love in Time that he had recorded. She put that out in 2009. It was 11 songs that he wrote. At the time, he knew had been diagnosed with cancer and he knew his time was limited. So he put together that album and wrote those songs expressly to be released after his death. So I thought that was a really interesting sidelight and the final album of his career. So a couple honors that he had after he passed away. A street in Peoria where he grew up was named after him. It was named Fogelberg Parkway. There were a number of tribute albums that were assembled. There was a tribute concert that I saw on Access TV with Joe Walsh and some others that performed some of his biggest hits. And then Part of the Plan, which was also another one of his very first hits. Part of the Plan was turned into a musical. It featured his music, and it got great reviews, so that's good to know. Now, as far as this album, Exiles, it got very mixed reviews, and quite honestly, mostly bad reviews. The critics called him phony for rocking out here after he had made his name doing so many ballads. They called it phony. They called it a laughable attempt at doing soul. And another one called this album soulless. I find that a little bit harsh because to me only about one of the songs, there's 10 songs on the album, only one song had even a tinge of soul to it. I really did not get that vibe, so I thought the critics were being really ravenous on this one. Others said, though, it was a strong record. They said that he returned with a blazing vengeance here. So mixed reviews, but the majority of them that I read were not good. The album hit number 48 on the Billboard charts. It had 3 singles, Lonely in Love, Seeing You Again, and She Don't Look Back. Album was just over 45 minutes. There's 10 songs. Fogelberg wrote all but one, and that is a big subject matter that we'll talk about too. The one that he did not write, rather, the cover that he did. There were no big name guests on this. Some of the typical names that you'll see on LA studio musician charts were playing on this. The only name that appeared anywhere on here that I recognized was Timothy B. Schmidt of the Eagles sings background on the very last track of the album. But that's the majority of what we're going to talk about as far as the going into the prelim on Exiles. So let's get into the album. So number one, the first track is title track. It's called Exiles. It opens with a very Springsteen-ish kind of sound to it. The sax is very prominent on this. It's got a very Dancing in the Dark kind of sound to it. And again, this album was released in 1987. Dancing in the Dark was 1984. Don't think of it was not a ripoff. I'm not trying to say that it sounded at all. It was not a ripoff of Dancing in the Dark. Just had that same kind of vibe to it. The way Dancing in the Dark was this poppy song with sax with Bruce Springsteen dancing with Courtney Cox on the video. So this song, it's totally about Fogelberg's recent divorce. He's singing about where did they go wrong. He's weary of all the battles. So for such a down subject, it's a very upbeat song, and very conceivably, or very commercially rather, acceptable as far as this could have been a big MTV hit, just like Dancing in the Dark was a big hit on MTV. So a good, strong, poppy open with Exiles. Again, just weird subject matter for such a positive sounding kind of song, such an upbeat song. So, and also the name Exiles, not sure. Again, just kind of a weird term for such an upbeat sounding song. So, anyway, number two, second song is called What You're Doing. Immediate Journey sound. So we start with Springsteen on the first song, and then this one goes to Journey as it opens. So, but then this is the one that gets a little bit bluesy. Again, another bitter song to the ex-wife. So the music actually does sound a little bit like Who's Crying Now, which came out in 1981. This came out in 1987, but Who's Crying Now, but bluesed up a bit and with the added anger of the subject matter. So he says he sees right through her. She's throwing away all that they have. Another good song, despite the subject matter. Another good song. What it made me think of was Adele. And I've made this joke about Adele for years, that anytime somebody breaks Adele's heart, it turns into a classic, great album and a great set of songs about her heart being broken. So I feel like two songs in on this, it's like the same thing. It's like Dan Fogelberg's heart has been broken, and he is producing this amazing album, at least two songs into it, about the divorce and about the heartbreak and the breakup. So, all right, then we get to the third song. It is Lonely in Love. It is the big hit single from this album. The previous songs put the title of this in perspective. So Lonely in Love, obviously, he's brokenhearted, after what he's been going through. So we're three songs in. This has all been heartbreak. Basically this whole album so far has been heartbreak. So to me, this is Lonely in Love is just, honestly, it's a lovely adult contemporary song. It hit number 2 on the charts. I will readily admit I'm a sucker for his songs like this one, his songs specifically, because I love this guy's voice. And I love the way he sings. And this song is a perfect epitome of that. So the sax in here is a perfect match for his voice, and his voice, and then he's doing the harmonies too. And the sax just matches it perfectly. So this one is a little less bitter, I will say that. This one is just more sad. This one is more about the sadness that had happened, and the way it played out as it did. It's not as much of the bitterness. It's just at this point, the realization of the breakup is hitting him. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that if you listen to these lyrics, the song is heartbreaking. It really is. And that being said, it is a magnificent song. So Lonely in Love, every reason to have hit number 2 on the charts. It's just a fantastic song. Just heartbreaking, but a great song nonetheless. So, all right, fourth song is called Seeing You Again. It has a piano open, very much like a Lionel Richie song. It just has this Lionel Richie piano ballady kind of song to it. So his voice just soars on this song. And you can hear the heart that he's pouring out. As, he's pouring out his heart to her on this song. So I really, truly, I know Lionel Richie is still around. I think he does, American Idol. I don't know if he's still recording and releasing music, but he should cover this song, because this is completely, I feel like this song was written for Lionel Richie. It just seems like it should be him sitting at a piano performing Seeing You Again. So anyway, after the bitterness of the first couple songs, This one shows how complicated the divorce was and how complicated the breakup is, as they all are. And it shows how brokenhearted Fogelberg is over all of this. So truly another heartbreaking song. I can say it again. This song is heartbreaking. So I will say this album, 4 songs into it, I'm picking up a theme here, as you can tell. It's all about the breakup of this marriage, and it's all about that subject and her walking away from him. So I would say you've got to be in the right frame of mind to listen to this album, unless you're just going to put it on and enjoy the music, because every song has been about this horrible divorce that they had. So you got to be in just the right mood for this album, but it's so far so good. It's been a really good album. So the other thing I want to say about Seeing You Again is this was a single. And I'm like, how is this a single? I mean, it's like Lonely in Love, just that crossed over. It didn't matter because, yes, it was heartbreaking, and yes, it was a sad song. But Seeing You Again, just so sad, and it's like so powerfully pouring out his heart. So I just don't know how this was released as a single. I guess their options were somewhat limited once we get into it. How many of the 10 songs were about the divorce? So I guess, the record company felt like they had to release a handful of songs as singles. So I guess this one made the cut. Great song, again, great piano ballad. But how it was turned into a single, I have no idea. And that's why it probably didn't chart as highly as Lonely in Love did. Because while it was a great song, just truly heartbreaking. I don't know how many people wanted to have heartbreaking singles from Dan Fogelberg one after another. So, all right, we are at the halfway point. We will take a break, we'll pay some sponsors, and we'll be right back with side 2 of Exiles, 10th album by Dan Fogelberg on the Record Store. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the Record Store. This episode, we are covering Dan Fogelberg's 10th album. It's called Exiles. And so far, after 4 songs, we are discovering a theme. Let us see if that theme continues. So, all right, we're on the 5th song. It is called She Don't Look Back. This was another one of the singles that didn't do really well. Lonely in Love did really well, and the other 2 singles, not so much. So, She Don't Look Back comes on heavy with synthesizers here. It has this Kenny Loggins vibe to it. Immediately get this Kenny Loggins kind of vibe to it. Kenny Loggins, who was always around, there was Loggins and Messina, and then he had some solo stuff, but then it seems like he exploded with all the songs from the movie soundtracks, and that's exactly the vibe that I get from this one, She Don't Look Back. Could have definitely been like a single from a movie, and totally has that Kenny Loggins sound. So add that name to the list of people that you can say are in the genre of Dan Fogelberg. So this one isn't really bitter or sad, but he's just saying that she has a trail of broken hearts behind her. So again, kind of like the first song, it's kind of a fun track that I think, again, the subject matter doesn't kind of match along with the fun, poppy sound of the music itself. The Trail of Broken Hearts, obviously, he had to get that line in there because it's still the bitterness is going on here. So, but it's a fun track. I felt like listening to it, it could have been front and center for a Kevin Bacon movie, a Bill Murray screwball comedy. Totally, just like I said, I can't get the Kenny Loggins connection out of my head for this song. So just a really good song, pleasant, despite the message and despite all the surrounding songs around this, both before and after this song. So She Don't Look Back, great song. Not really sure why it didn't become a big hit, because I think it could have been, had it been released in conjunction with, I don't know, Footloose or whatever, could have been a bigger hit, but She Don't Look Back at number 5. All right, that takes us to the 6th song, and it is called The Way It Must Be. So I'm getting a little bit into the song, and my first reaction is, wow. First off, it has like kind of a countryish open. And here, the wow is because he completely flips the script. So Dan Fogelberg, is now taking the blame for what happened. So he's taking the blame for the divorce. He's taking the blame for all the pain. So we're 5 songs in, and he's been ripping on her pretty much for all that she put him through. But then here, he flips it. So The Way It Must Be is now about the distance between them and all the pain that he caused. And yep, it's all my fault. So I gotta say, man, was this a messy divorce? This was such a messy breakup. It's just amazing. So he decides, he's gonna take, at least on this one song, he's gonna take the blame for everything that went south in their relationship. So there's so much regret in his voice here. This completely, at this point, we're 6 songs in out of 10. And this locks it in for me that this is a concept album for sure. And it's exploring all the different angles of an ugly divorce, basically. It just every song has been about that subject. So I think the critics are either really mean, which we know critics can be really mean, and that is not exactly breaking news, but the critics are really mean here for panning this album. Like the ones that panned it, and the ones that said it was bad. I'm like, how can this guy is pouring his heart into these songs, and they obviously mean so much to him. And this album is kind of cathartic and just amazing put together. It's just the way he puts this together and releases it, and just it's got to be freeing to him when he releases this album to get these feelings off of his chest. So I say the critics are really mean. And the other thing I'm going to say about the critics here is the fact that they don't mention this topic at all. I'm like, I'm 6 songs into it. Hell, I was 2 songs into it when I realized that this is all about, the heartbreak that the guy went through for the divorce. So there's no mention from the critics about the concept or the theme of this album. And so far, 6 songs in out of 10, that's what every song has been about. So granted, this one, like, he flips it and he's taking the blame and the responsibility for the pain that they went through and the divorce and the breakup and everything. But how do the critics miss this, you idiots? Jesus. Anyway, all right, 7th song is called Hearts in Decline. It is another piano ballad. It sounds like early Elton John as far as the music goes and the piano playing goes, but obviously a completely different vocal style. This one is post-breakup. The reality is starting to sink in for Dan that he is now alone. His heart has been scarred, and repairing his life is going to take some time. So Hearts in Decline, again, points out how complicated all of this has been. I don't pick up on bitterness here. I don't pick up on, animosity like some of the other songs where he was so angry. He's just saying that he knows that it's time to rebuild and time to move on. So beautiful song, another piano ballad. Like I said, not at all a ripoff of anything that Elton John did by any means, but just had it harkened back to some of those really early Elton John songs that were so cool. And when Elton John really brought in how cool the piano could sound in a rock and roll song. So Hearts in Decline, another nice song at number 7. So now we get to the outlier, the 8th song. It is called It Doesn't Matter. It is the one song that Dan Fogelberg did not write on this album. It's the one cover that he did. So It Doesn't Matter was co-written by Stephen Stills and Chris Hillman. Stephen Stills, obviously from Crosby, Stills, Nash, Young. Chris Hillman was from the Byrds, an original member of the Byrds. So It Doesn't Matter was a 1972 release. And this song sounds like a traditional rocking version of Dan Fogelberg. That's how this song comes across. It's got really good guitar. It's got great keyboards. It's just an excellent rock song. And I gotta say, it's refreshing that this is the 8th song and it has nothing to do with that divorce. That's why it's kind of an outlier here, because we're 7 songs in. Everything has been about the same subject matter. And then all of a sudden, here's the song, It Doesn't Matter, which, you could look at that name, that title, and It Doesn't Matter. It could be his mindset, like, well, yeah, it doesn't fucking matter anymore. He could be that in that bitter frame of mind, but the lyrics have absolutely nothing to do with that. The lyrics are actually really vague and don't have anything. They're definitely not as obvious as the rest of the album as far as the divorce topic. So obviously, ironically, it doesn't matter, as in it doesn't matter to the rest of this album, So I love this song. I think it should have been a rock radio single. It should have been a concert staple. I highly, highly regret that I never got to see Dan Fogelberg live in concert before he passed away. But this song, It Doesn't Matter, is fantastic. It's a little bit haunting in its arrangement. And again, I mentioned this about Dan Fogelberg's voice being perfect for a couple of the earlier songs. But again, I'm going to say it again here. It doesn't matter. Dan Fogelberg's voice is perfect for this song. His voice was made for this song. It doesn't matter. And I'm so glad that they put that on here. and that he recorded it, because I had never heard this song before. I probably go back and look for it now and look for an original version of it by either the Byrds or Crosby, Stills, Nash, whatever. But man, what a fantastic song. So it doesn't matter at number 8, and ironically, it doesn't matter to the rest of the album. So then we go to number 9. This is where this album gets weird to me. First 7 songs, got it. Pure concept, got it. Was all about the divorce. Then we get to 8, where it had nothing to do with the divorce. It was a cover altogether. Then we go back to 9, which was another back to Fogelberg writing, and it's called Our Last Farewell. So this is back to the sorrow. Is it back to, Our Last Farewell? You're like, okay, this is going to be probably back to the divorce. I doubt it's about a death, even though farewell could be interpreted that way. So is it back to the sorrow? Absolutely. Opening line is, once I loved you. So it has this kind of REO Speedwagon piano ballad kind of sound to it opening. I think it's I Can't Fight This Feeling. I think that's what it's reminding me of. It's not a ripoff, just kind of has that vibe to it. And this is the phase where he says he will always love her. So I'm like, wow, we have gone through it. She has put him through it. She put him through it for this album. She put him through it in life, and that life led to this album's existence. And this album, quite frankly, is putting us through it. So and what's so weird to me, Our Last Farewell, another really pretty piano ballad. What's really weird to me is he married again after this album came out. So I'm like, man, what did the third wife, because it was the third, what did the third wife think of this album? I'd love to be a fly on the wall when she was first listening to this album and got her thoughts on that. So, and again, here's another thing with this. The placement of this song, Our Last Farewell, is odd. Last Farewell seems like it should be the final statement, and it should be his attempt at closure and moving on. But why was the irrelevant It Doesn't Matter and in the 8th spot, and then this is the 9th spot with one song left to go? This should have been the closer altogether. Our Last Farewell is just written like it should be the closer. The title alone should make it the closer. It should be like the song that was last performed in concert, or it should just, bottom line, it should be at the end of the album, should be Our Last Farewell. So, but there it is. It's a great song. There it is at number 9. Doesn't make sense to me that it's at number 9 when there's 10 songs on the album. So, all right. And then we get to the 10th song. It's called Beyond the Edge, the 10th and final song, Beyond the Edge. It says it's from a movie by the same name. It turns out it was a 1986 documentary about skiing. I looked up Beyond the Edge, and there were commercial releases with big name Hollywood stars that was called Beyond the Edge, but this was not those. It was from like I said, a little known 1986 documentary about skiing. So this song, another rocker, heavy synthesizer, again, that Kenny Loggins sound. This song is purely about skiing, which is what the movie was about, so it makes sense. He's talking about snow, and not that kind of snow in LA. He's talking about actual snow. He's talking about downhill runs. He's talking about 20 miles a minute. So it's purely about skiing. And again, it does not fit the concept of this album. So this is the song with Timothy B. Schmidt from the Eagles singing background on it. You couldn't really pick him up. It's a harmless rocker. It probably should have been, again, just on the album, on that the soundtrack of that movie album maybe, or it could have been a B-side and not even been on this album. So out of the 10 songs on the album, 8 of which are about the divorce, these 2 songs just don't fit per se. And one thing, like I said, one thing that's weird is how It Doesn't Matter. It was just such a fantastic rocker. And then Beyond the Edge is a harmless song, one of the lesser songs on the album, but still a good song nonetheless. So just a harmless rocker, probably really didn't belong on the album. So all in all, I will say I really, really enjoyed this album. I had no idea he had gone through all this. I had no idea there was all that heartbreak and all that animosity and friction, and that divorce was so bad. 8 of the 10 songs were about the breakup. So it just stands out to me that It Doesn't Matter and Beyond the Edge were so out of place here. I truly don't get it. I really don't get it. I'd love to I'll do some more research and find out why are those songs even on this album, because they just don't fit in. I thought, in retrospect, I think I would probably have kept them off the album altogether, which is hard for me to say because It Doesn't Matter is such a great, great song, but it just doesn't fit in. It'd be like something that had absolutely nothing to do with, I don't know, the first concept album that comes to mind is either Pink Floyd's The Wall or maybe Tommy, maybe Quadrophenia, I guess. But a song like a pure single that had nothing to do with anything on The Wall would have been so out of place, whereas I think everything on that album ties into the concept of The Wall. So this album is purely about the heartbreak and the divorce, and every lyric in every song of the 8 songs was leading you to think that, and then these 2 songs happened. So I don't get it. I loved It Doesn't Matter. Beyond the Edge was a good enough song, but I think they probably should have been somewhere else. I would say either he could have lopped those 2 songs off and released them elsewhere, or he could have just or replaced it with 2 other songs that are more about the divorce and more about the theme of everything else on the album. Or he could have just gone with 8 songs all about the one topic. 8 songs would have left this album at about 35, 36 minutes or so, which probably would have been acceptable. But again, totally a concept album about divorce, about the heartbreak of breaking up with the one you think is the one. But just a fantastic album. Exiles, just fantastic album. And I'm not at all diminishing the fact that those 2 songs just being so out of place doesn't take away from the album at all. In fact, one of them is one of the best songs on the album itself. So just an outstanding album, and just so happy that we have so much great material from Dan Fogelberg in his death, that there's so much great material that we can go back and listen to, and truly appreciate how much he was, in addition to just the singles that got so much radio airplay, both ballads and rockers, mostly ballads on the radio. But there were some really good rockers too. And I guess the Eagles would probably be another comparison of another band that you could say, from that same genre as Dan Fogelberg. So that is it, Record Store Nation. That is our recap of Exiles. I'm really glad I chose that album this time to go back and listen to, because I learned a whole lot more about Dan Fogelberg, who I admired so much, but I had no idea he had gone through all this. So that is it. We will see you next month. I want to send special thank you to Brian Trammell for producing this mess and making me sound better than I am. We want to send posthumous thank you to Dan Fogelberg in death for all the fantastic music that he provided. Something out of character for me. You sometimes, am I a hard rock guy? Yeah, my Heart, Cheap Trick, Guns N' Roses, I'm into all those bands, but then I also like this kind of stuff too. And Lady Gaga, I know that was an album we did not that long ago. So there's just so much good and cool music that's out there in so many different genres. So I think this one might be a surprise to people. But thank you to Dan Fogelberg. So much great music and so much to follow along with and so much to go back and listen to. And thank you mostly to you guys for listening to The Record Store. If you are a Patreon, you will hear, after this episode wraps up, you'll hear what my favorite song on the album was. And you might get to hear the actual song itself. I don't know. We can't reveal. So, but we will see you next month. If you're not a Patreon, you should think about joining. There's all kinds of perks that come with joining Patreon with us. But that is it for this episode. We will see you next month. And do not forget, I have fun everywhere I go. And we'll see you next month, guys.